wait a minute, who who am I? That was the
Mm.
question. And of course, for the next 20 years, I essentially made a U-turn. Right? I realized I'm Chinese. I need to relearn the language, relearn the history. And lo and behold, in mid 2010s, 2014, when my mother passed away, and I told her I would complete her memoir. And all of that became completely necessary, right? Because half of her life, she was Chinese, right? Half of her life was spent in China. And so, yeah. And so now I'm very confused as to who I really am because I'm neither Chinese nor American.
Welcome to the Immigrant Experience in America, an immigrant human library, where we amplify and humanize the experiences of immigrants in the United States and around the world. Listen in as we add another story to our immigrant human library.
They were the one that helped us to get a private passport. And with the visa coming from Mass General Hospital and then the private passport, we were able to leave China. Fleeing China is a harsh word, but leaving China, I guess, legally in 1980. And I'm still looking for someone of my age who left China around that time. I was probably one of the very few teenagers who left China around that period, shortly after China reopened to the West.
That is quite a story. The sort of almost fortune that's like following her life, despite her beginnings. It's amazing.
Yes. So the story is a tragedy. Her life was ended up being a tragedy, right? The memoir is a tragedy, but there were a lot of wonderful moments, and then there were a lot of terrible stories. And then she encountered these terrible historical events, man-made or natural disasters. But all the while, there were just going to be somebody coming along to carry her this extra yard, essentially, right, so that she could survive, or even if not, also thrive. And that's why that was what made her determined to sit down to write this book and remember all these people and honoring all these people, right? And so, right, so the impetus was there became that became her impetus to do so, right?
Yes.
Mhm.
Wonderful. So I see that there was some connection with her traveling to India. Where was it after she got to the US, or maybe she
Yes.
went one of the officials on the other side?
Right. That's why her childhood is amazing, right? So she so literally on VE Day in 1945, May 8th, right? Her parents plucked her from her desk at her high school in Yonkers, New York, and they boarded this U.S. Naval battleship. And en route, they went towards the direction of Africa, and ultimately passed the Suez Canal, landed in India, and they wanted to go back to China to continue their medical mission, and so they clearly wasn't thinking about leaving my mother in Yonkers, New York, right? So, but then a lot of many British and American missionaries in India said you can't go back there. The European part of World War II, or European theater, has ended, but the Pacific theater, the Pacific part of the war, World War II, was still ongoing. Japan hadn't surrendered yet, and so you shouldn't go back. So they ended up staying in India for about a year, and my mother actually attended this British boarding school in the Himalayas. It's called the Woodstock, British Woodstock High School. And so she befriended many Indian kids, and I even had a chance one day in Mumbai. She saw Gandhi. Uh,
Wow. And it continues, right?
yeah, so that's why the first half of her life was Forrest Gump like, right?
So I'm wondering, during the time when her adoptive parents left, like fled, literally, it sounded like, and she wasn't able to get out, did she ever have any communication with them at all, or that was the last time she actually saw and communicated with them?
They were able to communicate with one another by letters. for about 3 to 4 years, all the way up to about 1955. And but of course, when my mother came to the U.S., she inherited boxes of letters and files and things from my American side of family, right? And she found some of her letters were there, and then she found many letters her mother had written to her that she didn't remember that having read them. And in those days, when they type a letter with the carbon paper, so there's triplicates, right? So these are all copies, and she had no recollections of those letters. So implying that about 50, 60% were lost either because censorship or lost in the mail, right? Because it's a chaotic time. Until 1955, my American grandparents decided that um, they got to go back to China, but they can't go back to China. So they decided to go back to Taiwan. That would be the best thing to be close to Chinese people. My mom and I used to joke that her American parents or my American grandparents in their previous life, they were probably Chinese. So they just wanted to help Chinese people.
Mm.
But that turned out to be a mistake because Taiwan, we know the situation, the tension, the animosity between, or the tension between China and Taiwan even today, right? But of course, in the early 1950s, Taiwan is so thoroughly considered as an enemy of state. Right? So once they went to Taiwan, the communication totally stopped.
Oh my goodness. And you're
Uh,
thinking they're coming closer, but
yeah,
there was no
completely up.
communication lines.
Yeah, so the logic was totally reversed, right? Opposite to their logic. Right?
Oh my goodness. And did she talk about what the relationship was between, as she grew up as a young child being adopted? Like, what was it like being raised by, I'm assuming, people who may not look like her? Did she know she was adopted? What was that experience like for her?
Yes, that's a great question. From what I have come to know my mother, including writing, completing her editing, completing her memoir, I think she always thought of herself as an American and not any hyphenated Americans. And
Mm.
so, in many ways, she didn't really realize that she was Asian until perhaps after she and her American parents were separated. She had to learn how to live and survive in China. And even though they had some fleeting interactions with she had some fleeting interactions with her biological parents, but there's very few and far in between. And again, she was surrounded by Westerners. She interacted with many Chinese kids, right, in school and so on. That's how ultimately she met my father, right? But I think from her perspective, now I reflect back, having worked on her book, that in her mind, that she thought she was American. Not just some specialized American, she was American, right? And that she was American trapped in China. And everything she described in the book was really from a Westerner's perspective, witnessing what was unfolding around her. And I think it was coming back to America in 1980 during the ensuing 2, 3 decades, fighting to get her American citizenship back, she realized who she really was. Right? She was Chinese. Right? She was not a white American. She was not American. She was just another immigrant among millions of immigrants who were trying to come in and perhaps potentially taking away resources from people who are already here. That will be how she was viewed. And that was a total wake up call for her. And she didn't recognize that till maybe a little too late, also. So, right. So it was bizarre, too, that she spoke so fondly of her experience growing up in a Western surrounding, speaking English. She loved her parents. Of course, these are, again, extraordinary human beings, including many other missionaries that surrounded her, right? And so that was the image of her image, idealized, albeit, image of the Western world, image of America. But to be fair, during those 30 years in China, the idealized image was what kept her alive, in part.
Yes, I can imagine so, right? The first years that being in New York and going through all those struggles after her parents left, I can imagine hope of one day going back there kept her.
Yes, or one day being reunited with their parents, right? And those were initial during those initial years, and then later on going back to America, and later on just try to survive, and then suddenly opportunity came in late 1970s, and then yeah, then that was by that time. I think the word fleeing was on her mind.
Yes. And so I'm curious, what was the challenge around getting her citizenship? I imagine were there official adoptive paperwork? Did she lose them? What happened? Her parents
Yeah,
were in Taiwan. I can imagine the complications during that time, right?
correct. So she was officially adopted, and the court paper came from U.S. Supreme Court stationed in Shanghai in 1940. Right? And that was how she was able to leave China during World War II. Even though when she came to America in 1942 during the wartime, she was allowed to enter on a parole basis because of war. Right? And she was told that once you're 18, you should come back and reclaim your citizenship. Right? Of course, that never
Oh,
happened. Right? And so all of that, all those documents were available to the U.S. immigration officers. And but I guess those old paperwork from China, even though it was a U.S. Supreme Court in China, uh, didn't really hold any water in the U.S. It became a long and drawn out battle uh, with a lot of people helping out, including Congress people, senators, House representatives, and a lot of lawyers. Her own determination, right? But 18 years. It took 18 years for her to be sworn in. And she thought it was just going to be a repatriation process when we landed in JFK in 1980. Yeah. Yeah. She was
wow.
completely unprepared for this part of the struggle.
My goodness. And so, do you remember if she had to go through the process that people go through today of having to apply and go through the whole process again, or did the court actually award her citizenship?
I was with her. Of course, I was in school, and again, I was very young. And again, I confess to you, right? I thought I understood everything, but I really understood next to nothing, except I accompanied her almost weekly or monthly basis, making a trip to the immigration office. This will be in Boston because we ultimately settled in Boston, and so it'll be in JFK building, the government center on Cambridge Street. We will pack a lunch. We'll be there like 5 a.m. or 4 earlier, and there will be already a very long line. Hundreds of people already lined up. So we would take a number and wait for all day in a very dimly lit room, very depressing. And then once your number is called, you go up there, show them the forms you filled out. And more often than not, an officer or agent would say, "This is missing. Where is this form?" And my mother would be saying, "You didn't tell me that last time we were here. I'm telling you now." So, and then next thing, that person will be looking at the meter with a number flicking or clicking, right? Or flicking. And that person will be saying next. And you waited all day, just literally 90 seconds, right? So we went through many of those trips. It was very depressing. And one time, and that is why I was actually faster than my mother. One of the few things, or maybe one of the only thing that I was faster than my mother. My mother was fast and brilliant, and I hands down. But I recognized I was an outsider. This is not my home. I'm not from here. But my mother failed to recognize that, as I said to you earlier. She thought she was American. And then they couldn't, and then she will argue that, where do you think I can speak such a perfect English? And they said, we don't know. Your parents are dead. They're not here to voucher for you. Right. So and so yeah. So it was one time that she was about to grab that agent by the neck, and it was me held her back. She was so angry. She lost it, and then and I could tell the security guards were coming after us. Right. This is what I believe we went through, and I would say millions of other people have gone through. It's a it's a grossly imperfect system, right? Even though America has a long-standing history of allowing immigrants to come in and build a new life for themselves, but definitely the system is far from being perfect, right?
Oh my goodness. Thanks for sharing that. I have never heard such a challenge, but I think there are people still on that journey even today
Yes,
because they leave their countries for varying reasons, and sometimes papers get lost and they have so much difficulty proving, what they need to prove
right.
in order to move forward. So my goodness, I'm happy that you all were able to work through that grueling process and successfully your mom was able to get hers, and of course you and your sister, right, got your citizen at the
Right.
same
So,
time or later on.
no, my father and my sister, they stayed back in 1980. They stayed in China, so the family was split in half. And my sister did not immigrate until 2003, so 25, almost quarter of a century later. My father came out a little bit earlier. He retired from his job and decided to come out. My mother was not doing well physically, so he decided to come out to America to take care of my mom. So so ultimately, we were reunited quarter century later. Yes, so my sister became a citizen fairly recently. And I went through a very different route because I was a student, right? So, right, I, I much easier route relative to my mother's process.
Goodness. So you reconnected with her adoptive parents. And so she started writing. And tell me a little bit more about your experience then after getting your citizenship, going off to school. What was it like, observing your mom going through all these challenges, growing up as a child, a teenager in the US? What was your experience like?
Oh, that's a great question. I love that question because I want to talk about that too. I spent my first 20 years uh, just trying to become American. I was seriously under my mother's influence, right? And I try to read. I try to catch up with all the history, the culture that I missed in the 1960s of 1970s America, or even further back. And I try to become all American teenagers, just like my mother actually wanted me to be, or she had wanted to be when she was living in Yonkers. And then, lo and behold, I was able to choose science. I went to graduate school and became a faculty and began teaching. And then that took about 20 years, right? So it was late 1990s. I made my uh, pilgrim pilgrimage trip to China. And that was when I realized I couldn't speak Chinese very properly anymore. And I kind of totally forgotten about Chinese history. And and people look at me weird because obviously I'm Chinese. And then this is, where are you from? And so, yeah, so then it dawned on to me, right? Wait a minute. Who, who am I? That was the
Mm,
question. And of course, for the next 20 years, I essentially made a U turn. Right? I realized I'm Chinese. I need to relearn the language, relearn the history. And lo and behold, in mid 2010s, 2014, when my mother passed away, I told her I would complete her memoir. And all of that became completely necessary, right? Because half of her life, she was Chinese, right? Half of her life was spent in China. And so, yeah. And so now I'm very confused as to who I really am because I'm neither Chinese nor American. When I tell people I have two cultures, it really means you have none. When you tell people you can speak two languages, it also implies that you have zero language, right? Neither is your mother tongue, so our native speaking language. And so I'm now begin a new chapter for next 20 years is try to maybe synthesize the two, synergize the two, and see who I really am. And I think that's also a struggle most immigrants will go through, right? Because they try to find their identity. They were not as lucky as my mother, who naively thought that she was just American for most part of her life until she came back to the States and realized, wait a minute, no one treated me like American. Uh, but for me, I knew I wasn't. I wanted to be. And by late 1990s, I thought I was one. Naively, also mistakenly, I guess. So then now I realize I'm neither, and I'm actually very comfortable accepting that. But point is that trying to find out who I really am, right, is my next goal.
Yes, it's a journey. You're a third culture person. I've gone on my own journey since starting this podcast too, and reading, researching, trying to figure out my own experience of like disorientation, going through culture shock. This place is not like the place I was born and spent part of my life, and kind of trying to make sense why you don't fully fit into one country, and then you go back to the place where you were born and you don't fit in anymore because you've changed
Right,
after leaving for 2 decades. You realize you've changed. You sound
right.
different. You try to speak the language that you thought you had so well when you were younger. It just does not come out the same. So I completely relate with that experience. So
Where were you born?
in the Caribbean, in Jamaica.
I see. Okay.
Yes. And
Uh-huh.
so it's 20 years later that I actually started asking the questions. I just don't feel like myself anymore. I'm not fully fitting in, or as much as I try to switch, kind of learn American way of speaking and so forth, you just don't quite get it, right? And
No,
so,
I don't hear any accent from you, so I that's why I ask you where were you born.
right?
Yeah,
That's
so but you know it's true. You don't in this country. I'm a foreigner. I guess during at least during the writing of the completing of this memoir, when I visited China, I was a foreigner again in my own birth country, just like
yes.
my mother was half a century earlier. So it's bizarre, yeah, but it's again, it's very unique. I love this phrase "third culture," right? It's very unique to every immigrant.
Yes, my goodness. So you took on the project of finishing this book, and I can imagine it was quite a thrill after you went on doing the research and you were able to complete it. Tell me, what was that like for you?
In one word, exhausting. If I had known what I know now, I would never make that promise. I w- I didn't know. I guess I didn't know what I was getting into. Although I've been writing, but those were all short scientific papers, right? And even if you claim you wrote a chemistry book, you're just making contributions to a book with other authors. So this one was, uh, for lack of a better word, complete murder, right? And it took a toll physically, mentally, emotionally, and because you're just reliving your past, and much of it were painful parts. And I think that's how my mother went into depression in early 1990s after working on her memoir for about 12 years. And I think that's why she stopped, because it was just too much for her. And I completely underestimate that part. And so it took almost 10 years, right? 9.5 years to complete the entire memoir. And I'm just glad it's done. And again, it was extremely exhausting in terms of every way possible. All right.
Wow. Was it because of reading what she had wrote, or the research journey that you went on and the realities of finding out what she actually went through? Was that part of it, or what was it that was so challenging for you?
It was everything, I guess. Yeah, everything, all of the above. And she, when my father passed away in 2015. Before he passed away, he handed me 3 boxes full of my mother's manuscript, right? And I opened up as she already had 1,000 pages of manuscript, including completed chapters or edited chapters, incomplete chapters, and just notes and papers, and sometimes there'll be photographs stuck to a piece of paper. and she will have a reminder, a memo for herself, says, I have to talk about this person. And for me, it's who is that person? And then she wrote a lot, but there were so many gaps, right? I had to fill. And that's what I said. I went to China to interview a lot of people who were much older than me and, of course, know that period much better than I would be able to convey. So, yes, and then, of course, reading what my mother had written. And also reading what my mother had remembered of my childhood. I remember a few things starting when I was 1 year old. But again, those are very fleeting and few and far in between until I was much older, of course. But then she would have all of these details. And I guess I should tell you, my mother's memoir is much less of a memoir. It's more like a chronicle. It's extremely detailed. She
Mm.
was blessed with photographic memory. Of course, she also cheated because she read many letters that her own American mother had written to, I guess, her American grandparents. Right? So, but again, she remembered many details, many conversations, and stories. And so reading all of that, and I prefer not knowing because again, bliss is ignorant is a bliss, right? So not remembering, or not understanding would be fine for me. And I had to reread that. And of course, writing a book is editing, rewriting, rereading, rewriting, editing. So you're like trapped. You're like the Bill Murray character in Groundhog Day. You're trapped in this perpetual cycle until you get it right. And so you're reliving not a painful story once, but multiple times, dozens of times. And that takes a toll. I now know. I didn't know. Yeah.
Yes. Well, congratulations for
Thank you.
finishing in the book.
Thank you so
And
much.
congratulations for your retirement that you've been enjoying now for 2 years.
Yes.
What is next for you, Mr. Sung?
So now I would like to keep on writing. Most likely not a memoir, or not anybody's memoir, let alone my mother's or myself's. And so, but just writing, and I found joy in writing. And during this past year or so, I've been asked to write a lot of these 800 word or 1,000 word essays and short stories. I find that very enjoyable. So I plan to just keep on writing those, and maybe someday I'll correlate them into a book of some sort of events and stories that I had a fortune of encountering and remembering some of the people I had a fortune of encountering, I guess. So, right.
Are you still in touch with your adoptive grandparents and the descendants?
Oh yes, I so yeah. So they provided immense amount of help during this process, mentally and emotionally, and of course they were accomplished authors themselves, and they gave me a lot of fantastic advice about how to go about this whole project. Yes, definitely have been in close contact with them. Yeah.
Very good, very good. So the name of the book is Spring Flowers for
Uh,
those listening.
it's
Yeah,
Yep.
Spring
hmm
Flowers.
Yeah, spring flower, and you can type that, and then my mother's American name, Jim Perkins, and then Amazon.com, Barnes Noble will show up a page with all the info. Yeah. That's right. I also have a website now called Richard Perkins Show, my last name.com, solely dedicated to the book and to the memoir.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for sharing the story of your mom's journey, your journey of being a third culture person and rediscovering your connections with your heritage. It's been quite a very interesting journey for me to hear about the history of China during that time. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
We thank our listeners around the world, and we appreciate your continued support as we build our human library. Please remember to give us a 5-star review, subscribe, and share with your friends, family, and circle of influence.